Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. It has finally happened. Nintendo has lifted the veil and officially revealed the Nintendo Switch 2. We are going to kick off this episode discussing our first official look at Nintendo's long-awaited new hybrid console. Then later on, I will be joined by a different guest to discuss Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. But first, joining me for this initial segment is my former counterpart over at Game Informer. It's Kyle Hilliard. Kyle, it's been quite a while. How are you doing today?
I'm good. We were counterparts, I guess. I never really phrased it that way. But you're right. That's a nice. I like that. That's a good way to put it.
I like that you had this epiphany. You're like, oh, we were counterparts, weren't we?
Because it's like your coworkers, peers, whatever. Yeah, no, we were like, there was the Matt Miller at the top, and then you and me, side by side, high-fiving all the time.
High-fiving just constantly, even though I don't think we worked in person for the last 5 years. But
I don't know that we've ever high-fived in our lives.
I tried to go once, and you said, no, we don't do that here.
We don't do that here. Oh, man, Brian, I am so happy. Like, more than anything else, I'm happy that the Switch 2 is, like, real. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm just so exhausted because it's been like 3 years of the Switch 2 or the Switch successor is going to be announced tomorrow. Like, that is how it has felt for like 3 years. So like whatever else happens in the coming months, like at least the thing exists and we don't have to, and we know what it's called.
Yeah, we don't have to do this like dance around like, oh, it's Switch 2 or whatever it ended up being called. Or like we were with like Breath of the Wild 2. It felt like we were just calling it Breath of the Wild 2 for so long, and as Nintendo would call it, the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Yeah. That's what they should have called this, the sequel to the Nintendo Switch.
I mean, they just called it, I think, the successor to the Nintendo Switch in all their like official correspondencies up until now. And, I had been saying for a while that Nintendo Switch 2 is the only name that really makes sense. I know people were saying Super Switch, people were saying like Nintendo Switch Pro or whatever, but it's like all that stuff doesn't make you think that this is an all new system.
Yeah.
It makes it so that it feels like I pointed out on a recent episode, when they said new 3DS, they ruined the ability to call it a Super Nintendo Switch. Because they already established that if we put a superlative or some kind of modifier at the front, that's not a new version of this system or like the next generation. That's just an update to this, a mid-generation update for lack of a better phrase.
I mean, I completely agree with you. Like it is Nintendo's, right, undeniably its most like successful console, right? Like I'm almost certain, right? Maybe the Wii maybe outsold Switch.
The Switch is the Switch is coming up on being the most successful console of all time.
Period,
like it
right?
is.
It's coming out on top of PS2 pretty soon. Here,
yeah,
right?
It's like right there. Like it's like a few million below the DS and the PS2. The DS is only like 500,000 below the PS2, which is shocking.
Okay, because like with that in mind, like they need to capitalize on the excitement around the Switch, right? Like that makes sense. But the thing about Nintendo is like you can never ever count on them to make sense, right? Which is why I was like, yeah, like by all means you should call it the Switch 2. Like the Wii U, I really strongly feel like that the big part of that was that people just didn't understand that it was a new console, and that was like in part due to its failure. Because like even friends I have who play video games and like video games and get every Nintendo console thought Wii U was like a tablet that you added to your Wii, A lot
of people thought that, yeah.
I mean, so like I totally get like why it should be called Switch 2, absolutely. But I was still a little surprised because I just assumed Nintendo would do something weird and surprise us. So
yeah, so they put out this reveal trailer, just completely dropped it out of nowhere. But there was a lot of smoke telling us that this was probably coming this week.
A lot of rumors and strong rumors and stuff like that.
So it's a 2-minute and 21-second reveal trailer, first look trailer it's called, on the Nintendo YouTube channel. And basically it just shows like the original Nintendo Switch, and then it like does this rendering of like, okay, here it is like getting bigger and like stripping away all these parts of the original Switch and adding these other parts of the Nintendo Switch 2. And I mean, it's not the most eventful and informative trailer, but there are things that we can glean from it. Kyle, where do you want to start?
Let's the most exciting thing to me is the big, because they didn't, nothing's like 100% confirmed in this video, but like there is a strong tease that the Joy-Cons can be used as like a traditional mouse.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think is really exciting. I don't really like playing games with a mouse in general. Like that's not how I like to interact with video games in general. But I think the sort of the what it could mean, I think, is huge. There's like the idea that Nintendo could do fun stuff with it, right? There's also stuff. It's like they could bring back, they could put like those Super Nintendo mouse games on Nintendo Online, which is
Mario
fun.
Paint.
Yeah,
Yes,
Mario
let's
Paint.
go.
But the thing that I think about is like looking at kids who play video games today, right? Like the kids who play a lot of free to play games because they don't have any money to buy games, right? Their dream scenario is like they watch streamers play Fortnite and Minecraft and stuff like that with these like beefy PCs, right? And that's the goal. It's like, oh man, I wish I could play PC games like these people I watch online, but the only thing my parents will get for me is a Switch because it's affordable, right? And it's like it's a much better system to give to a kid than a PC, right? But with a mouse, like this is now the sort of only, I know you can plug in a mouse, I believe, to Xbox and PlayStation 5. I think that functionality is available.
At least the Xbox. I don't know about the PS5, but yeah.
Right. But this functionality I think is going to be huge for like that sort of generation of kid who's like, I now have a system with a built-in mouse. I can play Fortnite with a mouse. Because I can get my parents to get me a Switch, right? Like I think that's going to be a big deal. I think that's going to be like a system seller. Like it's not for me, right? I don't really care about having a mouse. I prefer a controller, and the thing I like about a Switch is that it's a controller. But I think that's going to be huge. I think that's going to make a big difference for young kids. Like I think they'll be really excited to play those free to play games that they love with a mouse for the first time, probably.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the trailer right now, and there is a sequence where they go into like the strap like case, and then the two Joy-Cons race across a countertop or a surface of some sort, literally looking like real mice, like not like a computer mouse, like two like actual animal mice running across the countertop, and it's very heavy-handed in the hint.
Yeah.
So I think you're
and you can see little very much it looks like optical sensors on the I don't know, I'm assuming it's on both left and right.
It looks like it, like based on that sequence that they showed in the trailer. I also want to stick on the Joy-Con because I like that. I wish I had my Joy-Con over here because I could display it on the video version, but basically they took, oh, look at that. So like if you look at the Switch 1 Joy-Con, it is extremely flat up top. It has those buttons, but it's flat. And if there's ever a game where you need to hold the controller sideways and actually use the shoulder buttons, it sucks unless you put on like the strap case for, I don't know what the actual term is. This, they look elevated, and it looks like they're actual buttons on the tops of the sideways Joy-Con, which tells me it's going to be a lot more comfortable playing these games sideways on the Switch 2.
Yeah, I think so. I think you might be right. Yeah.
And I mean, I know that in that rendering, I don't know how closely you looked at the Genki leak that happened last week, but there was, Genki put out the full like 360 rendering of what the Switch 2 was going to look like. And it turns out they were very accurate, even though they said, oh, it was just based on rumor and speculation. And Nintendo said, oh, that's not official at all. And, you look at this and you're like, oh yeah, they absolutely knew what the Switch 2 was going to look like.
Yeah.
But the thing that they had on theirs was the ability to put like grips on the bottom of the Joy-Con. I don't see that being on the stock Joy-Con. So I'm guessing that is like a proprietary Genki.
Yeah. I mean, there's like little doors and stuff, for lack of a better term. There's things that could open up and become, I mean, there's like, but it's hard to say exactly.
Yeah. So I think that, having the Joy-Cons and the screen and all that stuff bigger is going to go a long way for making this a more comfortable gaming experience, because I don't know about you, Kyle, but when I play a game on my Switch and I'm not playing in TV mode, my hands cramp up a little bit because it's just not the most comfortable handheld to play on. But that said,
Yeah.
this like the screen is bigger. Like that's literally how the trailer starts. Is it's like it shows the original Switch, and then it shows a much bigger version of that, and it's like, oh, this is Switch 2.
Which, by the way,
And
I could take or leave. Honestly, I don't need it to be bigger. Personally, like my favorite way to play Switch is still Switch Lite. Like I like the
oh
sort of smaller, more compact screen. So like, and like the thing that like I always bums me out about Steam Deck is how bulky and heavy it
yeah,
feels. So like I don't. That's not really like it's fine is kind of my personal reaction, you know. But I don't know. What about you? Are you excited that it's bigger, or are you
I'm
kind of
excited that it's bigger, and I'm excited that it's not as bulky as the Steam Deck, as you'd
yeah?
indicated,
I
because
hope
like
it's lighter. I mean, it's got to be lighter, right?
yeah, it can't be heavier.
It
No.
can't be heavier. Yeah.
Unless they fill it with just like pure cement. Like that's the inside of the Switch 2. That's why they didn't announce that.
They just have like where you can pour in liquid to make it heavier.
That's actually the number one feature that they're holding off until the next round of information. But no, like because I will sometimes not bring my Steam Deck on trips, and I'll just have my Switch with me. When like when I got my Steam Deck, I was like, oh, I'm going to bring this with my Switch all the time. But like it fills up your backpack pretty quickly when you are traveling and you have both
Yeah.
a Switch and a Steam Deck. And I'll usually throw my iPad in there. Not that takes up a whole lot of room anyway, but like the Steam Deck sure does. The Steam Deck takes up a ton of space, and I appreciate that they include a case when you get a Steam Deck. But man, does it
It's a
does
lot.
it fill up your backpack fast?
Yeah.
So yeah, I do appreciate, even if it is bigger in form factor and like the screen and all that stuff, that it is going to be at least still pretty slimline.
Yes, it seems to be. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have nothing at all about like tech specs or anything, but it seems like the Joy Cons are, bigger along with the screen. The analog sticks are seemingly reinforced. They
Yeah.
did some sort of like different, and there have been rumors that that was going to be what Nintendo was going to do also, because it sounds like they are taking the feedback of the Joy-Con drift pretty seriously.
As they
Um,
should. Yeah.
yeah, new kickstand. Not that I ever really used the Switch One kickstand, but this one looks like it's
Yeah.
sturdier. It's more adjustable. It looks
Well,
like you
that's
can
yeah.
adjust the angle.
The OLED did that too, where it was like, and it actually was bigger. If you're watching the
Oh,
video
okay.
version, like it is a full, like that's so it's like the Switch 2 like gets rid of all this extra stuff, you know, inset part. So
Yeah, it's like a
I don't know if it's
horseshoe
better
design.
necessarily, but yeah.
But yeah, I'm scrubbing through the video here.
The other little thing that was kind of like, oh, that's interesting, is there's two USB-C ports. There's one on the bottom
Oh
and one on
yeah.
the top now, which is like it's kind of it took me seeing someone post about it online and then rewatching the video to be like, oh, interesting, which is like that's cool. Like when I'm like charging my Switch and I'm not like if I'm when I have it plugged in, if I'm playing it like a handheld, it is a
Hmm.
little awkward to have the plug on the bottom. So maybe you can like, and there's also like you can plug in more accessories that way and stuff.
Yeah.
It's small, but it's like, yeah, that might have some interesting ramifications. It'll certainly make it a more convenient system overall.
I've heard some people speculate before this was even revealed. Like this is like months ago. Some people were speculating that maybe there's a way to plug in a second screen, and maybe that's why we have
Oh, interesting.
multiple
Okay.
USB-C ports.
Huh.
I don't know. Nintendo has a lot of games that had second screens in its history, so I wonder if they would want to find some way to put like DS, 3DS, Wii U games on like the Switch and just make this like the Nintendo platform. You don't need to worry about having your DS or 3DS still charged up if you want to play a DS or 3DS
That'd be
game.
really cool. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, how would that work? I wonder, because it's like, if it needs, like, would you be? I wonder if there's some capability where like you play your Switch on your couch, but you're actually streaming your second screen to the TV or some in some way.
Yeah,
Like maybe the dock has some wireless connectivity or something. I don't know. Now we're
right.
kind of just I'm going pie in the sky at this
Yeah,
point.
this is very speculative, this part of
Yeah.
it. One thing that we know for sure, though, is they showed off a Mario Kart game.
Yeah, presumably 9, right? Like,
Presumably 9. I mean, the character designs are different. I don't know if you zoomed in on Donkey
yeah,
Kong. Everybody's
Is
doing
Donkey
that.
Kong look particularly different?
Oh, he's very different.
We reacted to it live over on MinMax, like we all watched it together, and we were kind of like looking at Mario and Luigi, and they just seemed a little squatter. But I hadn't really looked much at Donkey Kong.
Yeah, Donkey Kong is the biggest difference, I would say.
Okay, cool.
If you're looking at the trailer, if you look at like 153 on the trailer, you'll see Donkey Kong on the right side there, and he is looking quite bulky.
Oh yeah, he is looking a little different. Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, we're not getting any additional information about this until April 2nd. But they did also double down on the fact that Nintendo Switch 2 plays both physical and digital Nintendo Switch games. Certain Nintendo Switch games may not be supported on or fully compatible with Nintendo Switch 2. Details will be shared on the Nintendo website at a later date. So they specifically say digital and physical, which is good confirmation. We knew that it was backwards compatible, and I would have been very shocked if they were like, "Oh, only your physical games work with this," because I would throw my Switch 1 into the lake if that was the case.
Well, no, you got to keep it because you can't.
That's true.
You got to hang on to it.
But yeah, they show Super Mario Brothers Wonder, both cartridge.
It's nice
running on both, and then they had presumably digital would work there. I've seen some people speculate that it's like the peripheral based games, like maybe like Ring Fit Adventure wouldn't work on Switch 2.
Oh yeah, and also I mean Switch 1 has like an IR sensor on the top or the bottom of the right Joy-Con, and I don't think that's here. I don't know of anything that took advantage of it other than like Labo, where you could like, because it was essentially like a little camera, but it's just like really I never saw any use for it, you know.
Yeah,
but that would be the kind of thing that's like, yeah, well, you know, maybe there's one or two things that use that IR camera, and those games don't really work on Switch 2, I guess. But yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it's all speculation that we are going to do on this this show at this point, but we do have a few other small details. So I'm looking at the official press release that Nintendo sent out after this, and it says Nintendo Switch 2 plays Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games, as well as both physical and digital Nintendo Switch games. Certain Nintendo Switch games may not be supported or fully compatible with Nintendo. Okay, we already said that.
Yeah.
For more details on Nintendo Switch, please tune in for the Nintendo Direct Nintendo Switch 2 4/2/2025, which will air on Wednesday, April 2nd. Nintendo will also hold Nintendo Switch 2 experience events where consumers can go hands-on with Nintendo Switch 2 in cities around the world. The host cities and schedule below. So in the US, it is New York, April 4th through the 6th, Los Angeles, April 11th through the 13th, Dallas, April 25th through the 27th, and Toronto, well, it's not the US, it's North America, April 25th through the 27th. That's it for the US.
I was hoping, I was genuinely hoping for Minneapolis because Nintendo comes to the Mall of America often.
Constantly. Yeah. I was as well, and I was kind of shocked. And then in Europe, I'm not going to read all the dates, but Paris, London, Milan, Berlin, Madrid, Amsterdam, and then in Australia you have Melbourne, and then Asia you have Tokyo, Seoul, Hong Kong, and Taipei.
So this is all after April. This is right.
So I think there's also direct. It's all after the Direct. The first ones are New York and Paris. But this does give us some indication that this system is not coming out before June, because the Seoul hands-on event runs from May 31st to June 1st.
Yeah.
So I would be surprised if it was coming out before then, because all the North America and Europe dates are in April or May. So I was thinking, maybe we'll get it like end of May, early June. It seems like we're probably not getting it until at least June 1st. But Hong Kong and Taipei are just TBA, like in terms of dates. So it might even be later than that.
Yeah. And optimistically, like just because they're having these events, you know, those events could still be occurring after the system's out. They're still going to try to promote it and get people to check it out, even if you can buy it. But yeah, I think you're probably right, though.
Well, that says consumers can go. Okay, I was wondering if it was like, if they had framed it like consumers can get hands-on with the Nintendo Switch 2 before it comes out. I was wondering if it was maybe there, but no, there's nothing in the press release, at least, that says that.
Maybe that Direct will be like, and it's available now. They'll pull the Sega Saturn, but it'll actually work. It'll actually work in 2025, where it didn't work for the Sega Saturn. You know?
Oh yeah, I've said that. Like, you know, it would make sense to do it now. And I'm not saying it's the smartest idea, but it would make a lot more sense now that we have internet and social media and, the ability to actually get things out to people quickly instead of just let's rush this out as fast as possible. But yeah, I'm looking at like other speculation that people have on the internet, and they're saying like, the fact that there are 24 starting points in Mario Kart's like opening, like where it shows like at the starting line, there are like 24 of like the hash marks. So
that's funny that people are already. I'm not surprised, but yeah, that's funny that they caught that detail. Yeah, look at that. Okay.
Yeah, so there's that looks like a new area. That doesn't look like Calamari Desert from the N64. It is called Mario Circuit, I believe, if I saw.
And there's like a pit stop as well by that like Yoshi restaurant.
Yeah.
Which is like could just be a place where they put an item that you scroll through, but maybe there's a gameplay mechanic there too.
I will say there's no items in the footage, is there? No item boxes
in the restaurant. There's like something glowy, right. But yeah, I mean, you know how these things are. Like, it could just be like a place you can go to get an item or something, but like Nintendo's very thoughtful about these kinds of teases. Like it's like they wouldn't have put that there if they didn't want people to sort of speculate on it necessarily. But yeah. Another detail that we haven't really dug into too much is like it seems like the Joy-Cons are magnetic, right? Like click in, which is very cool, and I like that a lot because I'm sure you've run into it too, where like the slots where you sort of pull them out kind of rub down pretty quickly, and like I had a Switch at one point where it wasn't even locking in anymore. So
yeah,
the magnetic part is cool. That
it's either magnetic or it's just a mechanism that it locks in, because that was what Genki was saying, was it's not magnetic. In the leak last week, they were saying it's not magnetic. There's actually a button that you have to push that releases them, which I do see the button.
Yeah.
There's also an additional button on the right Joy-Con that we have no idea what that does.
Yeah, because I was Leo Vader over on Minimax had the idea that maybe it's like a mouse nub.
Oh.
Which I thought was an interesting idea. I also was wondering if it might be like a like on my MacBook, the top right button is like a fingerprint scanner, which you can use to like approve purchases and things like that, or to log in. And I was wondering if maybe, because it looks kind of like the button on my MacBook, maybe it's something like that. But yeah, I don't know. You have any ideas of what you think it might be, Brian?
I mean, I've heard people call it the C button, like kind of like a reference to the C stick on the GameCube or the C buttons on the N64 controller. And if that's the case, it might be a little multi-directional thing, like almost like a mouse nub, like you're talking about. I could see that.
Yeah, because I hadn't really thought of that, but when Leo mentioned that, I was like, that would make sense, because it's like if they want it to be a functional mouse, but then they also want you to be able to do whatever you want without having to break off the Joy-Con and do like mouse actions, like that could be a way to do that.
Yeah, lots to still learn, which, like we said, April 2nd is when we will get a Nintendo Direct focused on that.
Which feels far away, doesn't it?
It does. It really does. And I saw all the European people on my feed saw that date, because it just says like 04.02.2025. They're like, February 4th, we're getting more details. And they had to be corrected. And it's actually April 2nd.
But that feels more right, like if they were like, more details on February and then release in March, because that's when Switch released, was in March. But yeah, I'm thinking Switch 2. I think you're right. It's probably going to be like, maybe it is going to be November. Maybe it will be a holiday thing.
I hope not.
Yeah, I mean, I want this thing, to be clear. I don't know if that's come across, but like, I'm kind of a sucker. I'm part of the problem when it comes to Nintendo, and that for the most part, I'm going to be there day one for any hardware. They could have said, we're not going to show you what this thing is. You have to go to the store and buy it. And I'd been like, all right, I'll do it. But I like everything I see. I like, and I want this thing, and I'll try my best to get one right away.
Here's why I think that it's going to come this summer, not this holiday. They're putting this in the hands of not just press, but consumers. That tells me that this thing is pretty much ready to go. And if they're going to consumers directly, we've seen a truncation of their marketing once they get stuff in front of consumers. They're trying to get things out pretty quickly. Like they showed Mario Wonder like 3 months before the game came out,
Yeah.
and or 4 months before the game came out, and that's a brand new 2D Mario game. I think that this is going to be a thing where it's like at most it's going to be 2 months from when consumers first get their hands on it to when they're going to be able to buy it.
Yeah, I would join you on that bet. I mean, just the way, I mean, you even think about Tears of the Kingdom, which they revealed they were working on it early, but then like we didn't even know what the game was until like a couple months before it released, really. You
Yeah.
know, like they hold that stuff close, you know. They like lately they like to announce things that are going to release like within a few weeks or months. You know, I know consoles are different, you know, in terms of like the ramp of getting people excited about it and stuff, but I think you're right. I think it will be pretty quick comparatively, I think.
Hmm. And I have seen a report. I wish I had the source here because I would love to cite them, but I've seen analysts have been saying that Nintendo has made several supply chain partnerships and efficiencies that will make it so this is a much more readily available console. And with the goal of selling 20 million units in the first year, which I don't know if that's achievable, but
Yeah, I think they said Switch 1 was like 15
I
in
think
the
it was
first year. 13?
13.8.
Okay. Yeah.
I think, but something like that. But that would be a huge success if they could pull that off and make it so
Yeah.
that we're not having to rely on scalpers.
Yeah, I would love to be able to get one without having too much hassle, you know.
Hmm.
And I live in a video gamer household, so there's a good chance my wife would want one as well, you know.
Yeah.
My daughter, who I was telling her, I was like, you know, the probably Switch 2 is probably going to be this week. That's what the rumors and speculations are pointing to. And she was like, why are they doing that? I was like, what do you mean? Why are they doing another Switch? She's like, yeah, why are they doing another Switch? So I was like, oh, we're very different. She's like, I can play Animal Crossing. I'm good. I don't need anything else. I was like, all right, fair. You know, saving me money. Thank you.
So, Kyle, one last question for you before we let you get out of here. Do you think this has an SSD?
Oh, oh, ooh, ooh. Yes. I
Um,
certainly hope it does. Yeah, I think so.
I
Probably.
mean, think about how slim SSDs have become. Think of how
Yeah. I mean,
less expensive they were than in
yeah.
2017.
It's gonna be that thing though that like the way Nintendo's gonna sell it to us, like gonna pitch it in like a future in April, and that direct is gonna be like they're not gonna be like, and we have a, you know, they're not gonna share a bunch of numbers and sizes. They're gonna be like, and with our new special hard drive, games will load even faster. You know, like that's how they're going to phrase it because they like to simplify things to a fault sometimes. Um, yeah, I think it does. I think, yeah. What do you think?
I hope so. I think it probably does, but I also think that it would be the most Nintendo move ever to just be like, games load even slower now.
Or just they load at exactly the same speed. They do. Nintendo does prioritize loading though. They really do. Like
Hmm.
that's. I remember I asked. I forget who it was. I think it was the Splatoon team of like, how do you guys manage to get the games so small, right? Because Nintendo games are
Yeah.
not big downloads. Or like, I think Tears of the Kingdom is like less than 5 gigabytes or something crazy. Like, I could be, maybe I'm. Hold on, let me not sound like a lunatic. But all that to say is that like that is a big priority for them. Is like we want the games to be small and we want them to load quickly because that's fun. Like that's a
Hmm.
priority for us. Is for it to be fun, it needs to load quickly. So I think that they would recognize that as like an SSD is something um, that they would prioritize because it makes the games better. And by the way, Tears of the Kingdom is 16 gigabytes, so I was like way off about that. But like a lot of games are like shockingly small. I think it was
No, yeah.
Mario Odyssey was the one that was really surprised me.
We said 16 gigabytes. I mean, if you look at the size of Tears of the Kingdom versus the size of any other open world game, I think something like
Yeah,
Assassin's Creed Odyssey is like 116 gigabytes or
yeah.
something like that.
16 gigabytes is like the character model for the protagonist or something like that. But yeah, Mario Odyssey was 5.7 gigabytes, which is
Yeah.
just like insane, you know?
I know that the 4K resolutions of those other open world games definitely ups the size quite a bit, but
Of
even
course,
back on
yeah.
like the Xbox One base model before 4K was. I don't think Xbox One had 4K at launch, right? I think that was the One X was added 4K, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But those games were still like 60 gigabytes for like a open world game, so it wasn't like still that big. But yeah, Nintendo is very good about efficiencies. Actually, we'll close on this, Kyle. What is your guess for price of this thing?
400.
That's where I'm at too.
Yeah.
I was on a podcast a couple weeks ago, or I guess it was last week, and we were talking about like pricing and everything, and I suggested that maybe there is like an individual model, like one is like a pro model, one is like one comes with an OLED screen, one doesn't, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if they did that, I could see them doing 350, 450, but I don't think that they're going over 400 for the, like, if there's just one model.
What was Switch at launch? Was Switch at launch $399?
I want to say it was 350.
How much was Switch at launch?
Well, it was 24,980 yen.
300 is what I'm seeing.
Okay.
So I could see, yeah, 350, 400, that zone. I think that'd be reasonable. Obviously, I want it cheaper, right? I'm not gonna be like, please charge me $400 for it. I would love it at $299. Hell, give it to me for $250. But
give it to me for free.
Give it to me for free.
Yeah,
but I don't think it's gonna go that low.
But yeah, I'm excited, but it was also kind of like one of those things where it was like, that told us even less than the Switch 1 reveal trailer where they were like playing the games on the rooftop, that notorious.
Yeah, well, I mean, that at least they had to explain what the thing was on a basic level. Here they didn't really have to do that. They just had to confirm it exists.
Yeah, more or less. And then we got a Mario Kart announcement, so that's fun.
Yeah. Well, did they say Mario Kart in the press release? You said you have the press release, right?
Let me see.
Because like they showed it, and I don't think there's even what's it called, like text on the bottom of the screen or anything that's like, not final. Sometimes they have those sort of like asterisks and stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Like, does this count as a Mario Kart 9 announcement? Kind of technically, I guess.
I mean, this is how they did Mario Odyssey on the Switch 1, right? It's like
right,
they just showed Mario running around.
They showed a couple seconds of it, yeah. And I mean, we've sort of glossed over it. I keep adding one last things to this, but like launching with a new Mario Kart is significant. I mean, that's huge. Like that is even bigger than launching with a new Zelda, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, not for me. I'd rather have a new Zelda, and like Breath of the Wild was this just like staggering sort of achievement that like made the Switch skyrocket into into the stratosphere for me. But like to have a new Mario Kart at the launch of a system, with a system that most people buy exclusively to play Mario Kart, that's a big deal. That's going to be huge.
So as of 3.5 months ago, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold 64.27 million copies.
Jesus Christ.
That is insane.
This one better be good.
Man. Yeah. And so Breath of the Wild, for reference, is number 4 on the Switch's bestseller list at 32.29 million. So
not too shabby.
About half of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which again was a Wii U game before it was a Switch game.
I know. There's some executive losing sleep that Nintendo doesn't just keep making Mario Kart games every year. Like, why don't they make it Call of Duty and just don't even like just take everyone off of every other game and make Mario Kart every year? Thank God that person doesn't work at Nintendo.
Yes. Thank God Nintendo is not owned by EA.
Yeah, right. Or Activision, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining me for this discussion about the Switch 2 first look trailer. Let people know where they can find you online.
On the internet. Blue Sky. That's where I'm at these days. Blue Sky predominantly. And over on MinMax, still doing that on nearly every week. So find me there.
All right, well, we are going to take our first break of this episode, and when we get back, I'll be joined by a different guest, and we will be discussing his review of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. We will be right back. With all the excitement surrounding Nintendo's next system, you may have missed that we actually got a new Nintendo release. Donkey Kong Country Returns HD hit Switch this week, and joining me to discuss his review is a freelance writer who previously appeared on Game Informer, but he just reviewed Donkey Kong Country Returns HD for Polygon. It's Ben Bertoli. Ben, how are you?
I'm great. I am reveling in the glory that is Donkey Kong.
Well, the listeners to this show know that I am a very big Donkey Kong Country fan. Just last December, we talked about the history of the franchise, one episode, and then I think literally the next episode was Kev Bayless joining me for an extended discussion on the creation of Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong for those games. So literally back-to-back historical deep dives into the Donkey Kong Country franchise. But now we're here talking, I mean, I guess you can't really say it's talking about the future or the current state of Donkey Kong Country, because this is, a remaster of a game that's almost a decade and a half old. But Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is out this week on Switch, and I know I'm very excited about it. But before we dive into your review of Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, we have a tradition here on All Things Nintendo where we get to know debuting guests through the lens of their history with Nintendo. If people are watching the video version of this show, they see that you've got plenty of Nintendo memorabilia in the background. But this, we're going to learn about your history with Nintendo. So it's first Nintendo game and favorite Nintendo game. So the first part of that question is, what is your first experience, first memory, first game you ever owned related to this company that we are here to discuss?
So I think both of these games actually are going to fall under games that were not made by Nintendo, but were exclusive to Nintendo, at least at the time. The first game that really, I guess, was on my radar as a kid, we got the Super Nintendo. My older brother did. He was 2 years older than me. He is 2 years older than me. And we got Super Mario World, which was, fun and cool. But the game that really grabbed me was Mega Man X. The original Mega Man X. Yeah. And I was just absolutely garbage at it. Had to come to my brother to beat every boss. But I have a very distinct memory of beating the very first boss, like watching him do it. And then being so excited that I had to go out and yell at the neighbor kids and tell them that I did the penguin, freeze penguin or something. And I was just so pumped. You get this new blaster arm for Mega Man, and I don't know. It's just it made me so excited about video games that I was all in at that point. Let's get more games. Let's get a Game Boy. Let's try the other systems. So.
Yeah, the Super Nintendo was the first Nintendo console that I ever owned after playing the NES over at family members' houses and everything. Mm-hmm. But where did you go from there after you had Super Mario World, which people who listen to the show know that I'm crazy about that game. But Mega Man X is an amazing place to start. Did you you said you went to other systems maybe, but were there any other games that you kind of were okay, well, this is the logical next step from here, or was it something obscure?
When I think about the Super Nintendo, we didn't own that many games, at least right off the bat. We went and we rented a lot of games. I know we rented, the original Donkey Kong Country, Earthworm Jim and stuff like that. I'm trying to think if there was another Super Nintendo game that I just loved to pieces. Actually, this is kind of a weird deep cut, sort of. Yoshi's Safari with the Super Scope.
Oh,
my parents, one Christmas they were just here, have a bazooka. So that game was one that I just felt like every time anyone came over, everyone wanted to play Yoshi's Safari because you get to hold this giant gun and shoot at Goombas and whatever else. It's just such a weird game, such a weird experience for the Super Nintendo, and just for Mario in general. What a weird world to put him in. So that one definitely has some good memories. I was oh yeah, I get the Super Scope.
It's shocking how many gun peripherals Nintendo has put out. There's the light gun, the famous light gun on NES. There's the Super Scope on SNES, the Wii Zapper in the Wii, and it's wow, Nintendo has put a surprising amount of gun peripherals for such a family-friendly company. Obviously, guns have a different stigma now than they did back in the 80s and early 90s, but. I remember my cousin had the Super Scope, and I played it 2 times. I thought it was cool as all get out, and then I just never thought of it again until adulthood.
I was looking into the history of the NES Zapper, and I guess there's gray and there's orange, and the original gray one came out, and then there was immediately some kind of bill passed that was like, toy guns can't look like real guns, and they had to make the shift to be orange, and so that's why there's those two different color changes. But as far as I know, I think there's a black super scope in the original Super Mario Brothers movie, I think, where he like shoots people or something, and it turns them into something. I can't remember. I've only ever seen that movie like maybe 2 times, but
wasn't it like it turns them into slime or something? I don't remember exactly.
Something bad. It wasn't like, oh cool, you're a dinosaur now. I don't think, but yeah.
Well, that's what happens at the end of that movie is, was it Dennis Hopper, who plays King Koopa in that movie, turns into like an actual dinosaur, doesn't he?
Yeah, like lizard guy. Yeah. Maybe that's a weird time. Maybe we need to rewatch.
That'll be an episode of that's. We were talking like having you back on after for a full episode, and maybe we'll have to have you on for like a rewatch of the Super Mario Brothers movie. The live action one, not the recent one that I actually like a lot.
Absolutely.
But that gives us the perfect segue into the second part of this question, what is your favorite Nintendo game of all time?
You know, when you first posed this question, I was like going through ones that were actually produced by Nintendo, and there's a couple that came to mind. Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, Elite Beat Agents, Donkey Kong Jungle Beat with the bongos.
Oh wow,
absolutely one of my
That's
favorites.
In contention for favorite of all time.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It's made by the Mario Galaxy team. It's so good. Or Odyssey team. I think both. It's really good. Pikmin, the original Pikmin. I love the Pikmin. But Banjo-Kazooie. It's got to be Banjo-Kazooie for me.
Oh man.
Yeah, that's
you are a rare guy through and through, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I just feel like Super Mario 64. It like blew my mind as a kid. I had a neighbor who had a Nintendo 64 kind of like right around launch, and I went and played it. I remember because I came over and I was like, hey, is Kevin home? Like, I want to play the Nintendo 64. And his mom was like, oh no, he's whatever, at baseball practice. And I was like, but can I still play the Nintendo 64? And she was like, yeah, sure, I don't care. So I just went and like ran around as Mario, and it just blew my mind. But basically, I just feel like everything that Mario did, like Banjo and Kazooie did it better. Like the worlds were tighter. It was like way more interesting and funny. The characters had more, like personality, and the collectibles, the sound effects. It's just, oh man, it's just my favorite of all time.
Like, look, I'm not going to besmirch your pick here, but I especially you're a debuting guest. You're taking time out of your evening to graciously appear on my podcast. But I will say it is blasphemy to say Banjo-Kazooie is better than Mario 64.
Hey, I love Mario 64. It was on my list of potential like favorites of all time. I mean, I love 3D platformers. It's probably my favorite type of video game. But man, yeah, that one just stuck with me. And I mean, I like Banjo-Kazooie much more than Banjo-Tooie. I feel like they tried to go a little too big on that one. I just felt like it was so like well contained. There's a few things they could have done better. Like when you collect the notes, they go away after you leave the level. Like that's frustrating. They fixed that on the Xbox release. But yeah, I love Banjo and Kazooie. I was trying to get like a book made about Banjo-Kazooie, like the development of it. And I worked on it for a long time, but it kind of went nowhere. But I did get to talk to some of the Rare staff about it. So that was exciting.
Oh, that's cool though.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Banjo-Kazooie a lot. I think that was the first historical deep dive that I did on this podcast. And it's like, when there's not a whole lot going on, like there's no news, there's no major topic to talk about. I usually just look at like the anniversaries that happened. And I think the first one that I did in this podcast back in 2021, or maybe it was early 2022, was a deep dive on the history of Banjo-Kazooie. So like, I have a lot of love for that as well. I just, I think it's kind of, that you hear like a lot of people say there's levels to this game, and in my opinion, that's how it is with Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie.
Yeah, I get it. Don't worry. I mean, Mario 64 is probably my second favorite, 3D platformer of all time, and obviously it was a huge influence on Banjo-Kazooie. But yeah, I think I like Banjo and Kazooie better as characters than Mario. He's more of like a blank slate, Like I feel like I am Mario, but I'm playing as Banjo-Kazooie. So yeah,
that's fair. And like I said, it is your answer, and I appreciate you sharing it. Now let me ask you this: as somebody who is a big 3D platformer, before we talk about a 2D platformer,
sure.
We've seen this thing happen, and it happens with a lot of things on social media where people will say, hey, this thing rules. And then enough people will say it that all the contrarian takes start coming out and saying, actually, this thing is not as good as everybody says.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I'm referencing specifically is Astrobot. I happen to think that game is incredible, but I think a lot of people started out being like, hey, this game is incredible. And then it won Game of the Year at the Game Awards. And, it wasn't my Game of the Year, but it was like one of those games that like, it was like one of 3 games that I would have been fine winning Game of the Year last year. But then we saw all these people say, actually, this game is just kind of like a mediocre 3D platformer and relies so much on nostalgia. And I've seen so many takes like that. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. Astrobot rules, right?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's phenomenal. And honestly, I don't want to say the nostalgia is the worst part of it, but it's like it doesn't even need it. You know what I mean?
The least compelling part
Yeah,
of it.
like I mean, it's exciting. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Gex or whatever. But like,
did you say that? Did you say, oh my gosh, it's Gex?
Yeah, I did. I yelled at my wife who was like back. I was like, oh my honey, it's Gex. He's back. I mean, I wasn't expecting Gex. But
That's
yeah,
fair.
I mean, I think it's really cool that they incorporated all those old IPs and were able to bring, like references. There was like a Jammer Lammy reference or something. I was like, whoa, no way. Like all 4 people who love that game are going to be so excited. But like without any of it, just the different like ways that you could control him and like the shrinking and the blowing up and all the different like special power-ups that you could get were so good and like not overused. I felt like every single level was giving you something new or a new spin on something you already knew about.
Mm-hmm.
And it works so well. Yeah, no, I haven't touched my PlayStation 5 very much lately. And that, like, I put like a solid like 20 hours into that game just because I was like, oh yeah, this is it. We're back, baby.
It is so good. And yeah, I'm right there with you. It's one of the best 3D platformers I've played in probably a decade. So yeah. I am super happy that game exists. And anybody who is listening to this podcast being like, why are they talking about this game? It's not on a Nintendo console. It has that Nintendo spirit. And if you have a PlayStation 5 and you're listening to this as a big Nintendo fan, go check out Astrobot if you haven't already. Because I mean, if the Game Awards giving it Game of the Year didn't make you do it, I doubt you're going to do it. But it really is like, oh, like nobody really makes platformers like this of this quality aside from Nintendo. And here Team Asobi is doing just that. And making it almost as good, if not as good as what Nintendo has been able to put out in recent years.
Yeah. You can feel that game. They make the best use of the PlayStation 5 controller. I mean, it's just like you're walking on different materials. You can feel it and hear it. It's crazy. That's
what Astro's Playroom was just like a tech demo of the PS5, and then everybody's like, oh, this actually slaps. And then like they're like, oh, let's make a sequel, and it ends up winning Game of the Year. So
I was shocked it got its own like full game release. I'm just thrilled that it happened in the first place, and hopefully the warm reception that it's getting means more, love for 3D platformers and another Astrobot game. Hopefully.
Absolutely. But let's talk 2D platformers here, Ben. Okay. You reviewed for Polygon a game that I'm very excited for. It is Donkey Kong Country Returns HD. The original game came out on Wii in 2010, and then it was eventually ported to the 3DS in 2013. That 3DS version added a little bit of extra content and also removed the motion controls, which I was very grateful for back in 2013. Now, more than a decade later, it is available on Nintendo Switch. So for people who didn't play the Wii or the 3DS version, Ben, what is the elevator pitch for this game?
Donkey Kong's back. So is Diddy Kong. It's basically like we're taking Donkey Kong back to his roots of this hop and bop 2D platformer. Kind of took the world by storm in 1994 when it came out for the Super Nintendo. This is my elevator pitch is too long. I'm realizing, but yeah,
it's a Skyrise.
Yeah, it's a really solid platformer with a lot of fun, kind of new gimmicks that they've thrown in, but feels very, like it's paying homage to the original Donkey Kong Country game.
And I remember when this was coming out for Wii, and we talked earlier about my love for the Donkey Kong Country franchise. it seemed as though the Donkey Kong Country franchise, with the sale of Rare to Microsoft back in the early 2000s, was just dead and gone, right? Like, it didn't seem like we were ever going to hear from the Donkey Kong Country franchise ever again. You know, Donkey Kong Racing, which Rare was working on for
Hmm.
the GameCube, was just outright canceled. It wasn't handed off to another developer. It wasn't like released under some like agreement between Microsoft and Nintendo that Rare can continue developing this game until they're finished because they already announced it or anything like that. It was just like, nope, cut off. The developer who made Donkey Kong Country and like revived this for, you know, all intents and purposes, a dead franchise
Hmm.
in the original Donkey Kong franchise. It was just like, okay, well, that developer no longer works with us, so I guess there's no more games coming out. And it was dormant for almost 20 years.
Yeah,
And like, I mean,
oh, sorry.
I was just saying, we got like, you know, Donkey Kong Land on Game Boy. We got the 3 Donkey Kong Country games on SNES in pretty rapid succession. But like, it seemed like we were just never going to hear from this franchise again.
Yeah, yeah. I remember there were some the original SNES games I think got re-released on the Game Boy Advance, which was great.
Mhm.
But yeah, it felt like Donkey Kong had kind of been relegated to like Donkey Konga and Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, amazing game that everyone should play with the Congo drums, you know. But yeah, I was so immensely excited when they announced this at E3, I think in 2009 or possibly, I think it was 2010. And then it came
It
out later
was.
that year. Um, but yeah, and the fact that it was like Retro Studios was doing it, like, you know, I'm not like a huge Metroid fan, but you know, Metroid Prime was critically acclaimed, beloved by everyone, and I was like, all right, these guys, they know what they're doing. So yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it's a fantastic studio, and they've done Donkey Kong Country Returns, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which is already on Switch,
Hmm.
and the Metroid Prime series, and they have Metroid Prime 4 Beyond coming out sometime this year. So, like, you know, they have a pretty good track record.
Yeah.
So, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD comes to Switch. It's completing the Donkey Kong Country slash Land series on
Hmm.
Switch now. Like, we have the entire series, which is fantastic. But it's weird that this was the last one to come to Switch. It seems like, you know, they put Tropical Freeze out because
Hmm.
nobody played it on because it was on the Wii U, and that's one of the best 2D platformers of the 21st century, I would say.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh well, they must be putting Donkey Kong Country Returns because it's like kind of similar. It's not quite as refined as Tropical Freeze, but it's very good still. So
Mhm.
you know, now that we finally have it, like, you know, how are you feeling about this? What does this do? Let's start here first. For those who did play it on the Wii and 3DS, like
Mhm.
myself, what does this Switch version do that is new?
So it has those extra levels that the 3DS version has. So if you've only played it on the Wii, there is like actual bonus content that you have not touched. There is a modern mode that on the 3DS was called New Mode, and you can equip items like extra barrels and extra hearts and like an invincibility balloon if you're tired of smashing that minecart into you know, different ledges and stuff. So the accessibility on this one, I think, is way higher. It's a good one to kind of maybe get younger players into, you know, just have them be Diddy. They can, you know, go off on their own and explore. And if they get too far away, it like kind of zaps them back to you as Donkey Kong.
Hmm.
And they can also get on your back and just kind of like hang on and act as, you know, like a little assist person in the background, which is, you know, more fun if there's like a really perilous part of a level. Um, so that's all new. I'm trying to think if there's obviously the graphics have been overhauled. Um, you know, there's the option for button or motion controls, so it's kind of the best of both worlds in that regard. But yeah, it's kind of like they've taken all of these re-releases of it in the past, and obviously the original release, and they've taken all the best parts and added on just a little more cushioning for the, you know, players who need it, and it's just one giant package now. So,
And when I was looking at all the individual releases that this game has gotten,
mhm.
talked about the Wii, talked about the 3DS, now we're talking about the Switch version. Apparently, exclusively in China, there was a version for NVIDIA Shield, I think it was.
Yep,
It's like,
2019, and that one was in HD. It was like 60 frames per second, like 1080p. So yeah, that's what I said in my review. Is like, hey, it's got a little bit from everything. It's got the good graphics from here. It's got the buttons from here. I mean, it has the motion controls are still intact. I wouldn't recommend them. They're not great, but yeah, I mean, it was re-released. I think this is like the 7th or 8th time if you count the Nintendo Selects and the fact that it was released digitally on the Wii U. Like, it just keeps returning.
hey,
Now
perfect
it's
name
back.
then.
Yeah.
So I liked your Polygon review quite a bit, and I was looking through it. It talks a lot about what we have discussed already,
hmm
but I was most intrigued by your headline, which I guess is the point of a good headline. And it said, "The weakest Donkey Kong Country is still pretty great." And I don't know if this was you writing this headline or if it was your editor. Okay, it was you.
It's all me. Yeah.
And I'm not gonna argue it, but I never really considered Return as the weakest Donkey Kong Country because I've always thought of 3 as the worst Donkey Kong Country. But talk me through this.
Okay. Well, you'll be glad to know that originally, and I was literally like up at night, like thinking about this, because originally it was the worst Donkey Kong Country is still pretty great. But I was like, I don't want to say worst because that means that it sounds like it's really bad. So I changed it to weakest because I don't know. I mean, ever since I played it in 2010, I loved it, but it just didn't seem to hit the same highs that the other ones did. And I might be a little biased because Donkey Kong Country 3 was the only Donkey Kong Country that I owned as a kid. That was the
Okay.
one that was the one we didn't rent. That was the one that my parents actually bought me. I think it was probably hey, I want the Nintendo 64. And they were like, but what about Kiddy Kong? And I was like, oh boy, it's something. So that's the one I've played the most, honestly. Of all the Donkey Kong Country games, I've played 3 the most. And I don't think it's better than 2. I would say I feel like 3 is better than 1. 1's like great, and it has that, it introduces you to everything, and it's a classic. But like 3 just tries some of the wackiest stuff, and like Kiddy Kong as a character is not great, but like he can roll on water, and Dixie is probably my favorite Kong, like just to control because she has the hover hair.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just where I went with it. Like Donkey Kong Country Returns has these weird like difficulty spikes that Tropical Freeze kind of ironed those out, or at least made them feel like it was your fault. Like, hey, this is hard, but I should have been able to do that.
Which is what you want from a hard game.
Right, yeah. And Returns just feels kind of cheap at times. And so I just felt like overall, thematically, and it doesn't have it has great music, but it doesn't have David Wise, although neither does 3. That it falls into that 5th slot for me personally.
And
So,
though it doesn't have David Wise, it does have a lot of like covers of his
Right.
compositions.
yeah,
DK Island Swing Returns, or the Return of the DK Island Swing,
Yeah.
and Aquatic Ambiance are all in there.
Returns. Yeah, it's all.
Yeah,
all I was looking at the track list, and it's all like this Returns, like Forest Frenzy Returns, and I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, that's fine. I think Forest Frenzy was honestly the track I heard that I was like, oh yeah, take me back, take me back to 1995. So, yeah.
So, given your love of Donkey Kong Country and also, I guess, Banjo Kazooie,
Mhm.
have you played the ukulele games?
Yes. Yeah, I have. And I love the team at Platonic, but something about that ukulele, it just didn't do it for me. It felt a little too barren in terms of like things to do. The worlds got bigger, and then it was like, oh no, more places to explore. They don't have anything. Now they have like a
Replay.
Replayly coming out, and I've been looking into it. There's a chance that I'm going to jump back in and give it a shot. The 2D platforming one that they came out with, Impossible Lair, was that it? That one was great. I like that
awesome.
one. I like that one a lot. Yeah, big fan of that whole team and everything that they're trying to do. But yeah, I was so pumped for ukulele, and then it fell quite short of my expectations. But I do think they're, once again, like lovable characters worth, exploring. And I look forward to what they're going to come out with next.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. I reviewed both the first Ukulele and Impossible Lair for Game Informer when they came out, and I was pretty excited for Ukulele, and then I was pretty underwhelmed by Ukulele, and then Impossible Lair, it was like, oh, this is just like the Donkey Kong successor, Donkey Kong Country successor that I've always been wanting, and it's by a
Hmm.
lot of the people who did the original Donkey Kong Country games. But what I was going to get at with this was how would you rank the Donkey Kong Country style games that are on Switch now? So we have DKC Returns, we
Hmm.
have DKC Tropical Freeze, and now we have Ukulele and the Impossible Lair. How would
Hmm.
you rank those three games?
I would say probably Tropical Freeze, number one. That game just does so many things right, and it's
Mm-hmm.
a fantastic like adventure. And then probably Ukulele, and then I think Donkey Kong Country Returns. But these are all like good games, you know what I mean? Like I don't. That's why it's like, you know, once again saying like the weakest Donkey Kong Country. That's still a pretty, you know. There was a
Mm-hmm.
thing that I originally wrote that was like, you know, being the weakest Donkey Kong Country game is like getting fifth place at the Olympics. Like there's so like, oh, you got beat, but you got beat by like some of the best. So yeah.
I mean, that's the same thing you could say about a lot of like high profile franchises. Like
Right.
there's some Zelda games that aren't like the best game of all time in
Hmm.
contention for the greatest game of all time, the way like Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild all like have a you could make an argument for them being like among the greatest games of all time.
Hmm.
Like you're probably not going to say that about like Triforce Heroes, but like at the end of the day, it's still like an above average experience. And it's
Yeah.
like that's kind of how you could say that about the Donkey Kong Country franchise.
Yeah. And I will say this. I love Triforce Heroes only for the reason that I have an older and a younger brother, and we all had it, and we all had 3DSs, and we
Oh,
played
well.
it like as adults. So I had a fantastic experience, the exact experience I think that they were anticipating, you know, people having. So I'm not saying it's Ocarina of Time, but I like that game a lot.
You heard it here first. The Zelda rankings go Triforce Heroes, then Ocarina of Time for Ben
Yeah.
Bertoli. How do the visuals of this game hold up? Because I've seen some screenshots, I've seen the trailers. In motion, it seems like it looks pretty good. But then I
Mhm.
look at some of the screenshots and it's like, this is definitely a Wii game that they just made look a little
Yeah.
prettier.
It's funny because I sent those screenshots over to the Polygon team, and I was looking at them on my computer and thinking like, these are all right. They weren't as big as the header is that they made for the review. And when it came out, I was like, huh, it's kind of pixely. You know, like I could see some hard edges and stuff. And I was like, I took that picture off of my, you know, OLED Switch. So I didn't really notice anything when I was playing it on the Switch itself or on my very large TV. Like there was no point where I felt like, oh, like that looks a little rough, you know. So I think it might just be the stills. It's a very, you know, action heavy game. You're jumping, you're swinging, you're climbing, you're throwing, you know, barrels at frogs, and you don't really notice it. It looks good, but it doesn't look like amazing. I wasn't like blown away by, you know, the detail or anything like that. But it's obviously an upgrade to you know, what it was on the Wii and obviously the 3DS as well. So it's fine. I don't, you know, HD is not the thing that I would focus on, but I'm not sure what else they could have called it. Donkey Kong Country Returns is a little much.
So one of the things that I love about the Retro Studios Donkey Kong Country games is the art style and like some of the artistic choices they make with the levels.
Hmm.
Like I've never been a big fan of like the tiki enemies that are in
Nah.
Returns. Like I think they I don't know, they feel a little weird and like out of theme with me
Yeah.
in like the Donkey Kong Country franchise. I don't know why that is. It should fit just fine because they're like on beaches and in jungles and everything like that.
I think they're fine. I think they're just kind of like not boring. Boring's not the right word, but they feel like they should be the enemies for like one set of levels, like one
Mm.
world. Oh, you're in the tiki jungle. Oh my gosh, here they are. And then they're gone. You know what I mean? They just don't feel like they should be something that's across like all worlds. Like they're definitely in place of some of those classic Donkey Kong enemies. Like there's no giant bees in Donkey Kong Crunchy Returns HD. And there's just something weird about that. Like, where are the big bees? Come on.
But maybe I'm confusing this with Tropical Freeze because it's been a
Mhm.
while since I've played either of these games. But is this the one where like there will be like the silhouette of Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong running along in
Yeah.
the? God,
Mhm.
I love those levels. I think they look so striking, and they're
Yeah.
absolutely like some of the most beautiful platforming levels I've ever played.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's definitely a high point for the game. And there's one of those where it's just like a beach at sunset, which is beautiful. And then there's one where you're kind of working in like the smog of a factory, which you would think would be kind of like, I don't know if that's going to work, but it really does. Like the atmosphere is cool, and like you have to kind of, you don't know, like there's a bush and it comes to life because like you didn't know it was a bad guy. All you can see is the black outline of it. But it kind of reminds me of Limbo,
Mm.
the indie game where you're like trying to escape the underworld or whatever. But Donkey Kong's there, and they make his tie stand out and like
Oh yeah,
glow, and
right.
Diddy's hat. It's just from an like art perspective, it's extremely well done. Those levels are just like, I just want to go back and play them and just kind of dig around and see like where I can get to and find all the hidden barrels and puzzle pieces and everything else. But they did that in Tropical Freeze as well. In fact, that's one of my favorite kind of like Donkey Kong gimmicks or things that they've done, because they actually did an underwater one, which was like somehow like even more
Oh
beautiful. Like,
right, yeah.
yeah, they brought back David Wise, and he's doing his like aquatic ambiance, and you've got like beautiful like silhouette gameplay, and it's just it's beautiful, and also like terrifying. That's
Yeah.
the thing too, is Donkey Kong Country Returns has no underwater levels, none
Oh,
whatsoever, not a single
interesting.
one. Yeah, it's definitely a choice. Which is why when Tropical Freeze premiered, I remember them kind of making a big deal, like, "Hey, underwater's back," and water levels and water temples are not always the most fun, but Donkey Kong, I feel like, really like had a good like handle on them in
Mhm.
the original SNES games. So I was pumped to see it return.
I didn't even make that connection that there were no water levels in Returns because, like,
Yeah.
I think I just assumed that there were in my memory because, like, they
Blocked them
it
out.
has such like a very like tight connection to water levels because water levels traditionally suck in
Hmm.
platformers and a lot of action games.
Yeah.
But then I have great memories, and I think a lot of it is because they give you the I forget what the swordfish's name is, but like they give you the swordfish.
On guard.
Yeah, and
Aha.
and you can just like, kind of cheese your way through it, and the controls were never bad like they were in some of the Mario games, or
Yeah.
like, outright non-existent like they were in the Sonic games. So it's like, having an actual character that controls well underwater while some of the most incredible music you've ever heard in a video game is playing. And then, oh, you can also get this animal that you ride and can attack enemies underwater. Like that made it so much better. And it felt like such an integral part, almost as much as like minecarts felt to Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
And then, to not have that in Returns is kind of a weird thing. And I completely just assumed there were water levels in my memory.
Yeah. No, it was surprising. And I wonder if it's because water levels do kind of have that rep that like people are like, "Oh, it's going to slow things down," and people don't like that. They're difficult because you're just trying to swim away from that shark but you can't. And
Hmm.
so maybe the developers felt that like, okay, we're going to perfect this. We're going to figure this out. And I remember in Tropical Freeze, they gave him like a little like spin. You could do like a kind
Yeah.
of a boost. You get Dixie Kong on your back, and she gets like a propeller hairdo going. So I think it's probably the right call to just like, hey, welcome back to Donkey Kong Island. We'll stay above water for now, but we'll throw you in the deep end soon.
Well, I'm glad they did because Tropical Freeze, like we both said, is absolutely incredible. Returns doesn't quite reach those heights, but overall, would you say it plays pretty well, especially now that they've give you the choice between motion controls and button controls?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great game, and it has the unfortunate, I guess, uh, honor of going up against all the other Donkey Kong Country games on the Switch. They're all there and they're all available, and so this is a great game. And if you love 2D platformers, you should play it. If you love Donkey Kong Country games and you haven't played it, you should absolutely play it. But I would choose Tropical Freeze over this. I would choose most of the Super Nintendo games over this as well. But it's there and it's good. If you love those things, then definitely, give it a shot.
I'm very much looking forward to jumping in once I officially am able to download it onto my Switch. If you want to read Ben's full review, you can find it over on Polygon.com. Donkey Kong Country Returns HD is available now on Nintendo Switch, along with the rest of the series. You can play the Donkey Kong Country trilogy on the Nintendo Switch Online SNES catalog, the Donkey Kong Land trilogy on Nintendo Switch Online Game Boy catalog, and then they also, as we mentioned, released the incredible Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which was the sequel to Returns. They released that on Switch back in 2018. But Ben, we are going to take our final break of this episode. And when we get back, we're going to do definitive ranking and get your eShop gem of the week. We will be right back. We are back, and it's time for Definitive Ranking, a recurring segment where we take a Nintendo topic and give our own personal top 5 lists. Since we received a remaster of Donkey Kong Country Returns this week, Ben, I want to get your top 5 Donkey Kong Country gimmicks from across the series. So I'm going to have you start at 5, count it down to 1, give me a sentence or two about each.
Okay. All right. This one's a little controversial because it is so frustrating, but I still think it's a really fun idea, and that is the rocket barrel from Donkey Kong Country Returns. It's such a simple play style. Like, it's just you pressing, the A button. Are you going up? Are you going down? But they add so many fun little twists and turns. And even though you're gonna smash yourself into countless enemies and cave pillars, I just think it's a fun idea. And every time I get to one of those levels, I'm like, oh, all right, here we go.
Strap in.
Yeah.
It's basically Flappy Bird.
Yeah. Essentially.
But yeah, I enjoy those as well. All right, number 4.
Number 4 is we talked about this already. On Guard, the swordfish in the swimming levels of Donkey Kong Country 1. And I can't remember if he returns for number 2 or not, but it's just such a fun, it's like another level of, it's another hit point. It's like this fast moving spear that you can just, kind of zing around the screen. So it's a good one.
Yeah, definitely a good one. Definitely a great way to make water levels a little bit more tolerable.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 3.
Number 3 is the roller coaster levels in Donkey Kong Country 2, which once again, are kind of a controversial take there because they do provide a lot of stress. But I just really like the thought that there's this villain who's built an entire theme park. And everyone, you can hear people screaming as you're riding it. You have to jump up and hit switches to open doors and things like that. And the roller coaster itself just looks like a big skull. I think it's a really fun twist on the minecart, levels from the original.
And I mean, it's nothing new that supervillains in video games are building amusement parks. I mean, I guess maybe it was new at this point because I don't think Dr. Robotnik was out there building Eggman Land, and I don't think Bowser was making that final world in Super Mario 3D World. I mean, I don't think there were any other predecessors like that. So maybe this was pretty novel. I guess there was Carnival Night Zone and Casino Night Zone in Sonic 2 and 3, but
Yeah. And K. Rool just doesn't seem like the kind of guy who has the wherewithal to build a full amusement park, but who knows?
Yeah. That brings us to number 2, right?
Yeah, number 2. All right. So, this already came up as well, and it's the silhouette levels in Donkey Kong Country Returns and Tropical Freeze. Just, beautifully executed and a nice twist on the classic, platforming level.
It is, yeah, and absolutely gorgeous. It's one of those level types that I just constantly look forward to. And when one happens, you kind of rub your hands together, oh man, we got one.
Here we go.
A feast for the eyes.
Yeah. And number 1, and I believe this one's only in Donkey Kong Country 3, and that is the Low G Labyrinth. It's a level where there's very low gravity. You can jump really, really high. You float down. So they're giving you these challenges that there's no way you could normally do. You couldn't fall through all these enemies, with normal physics. But now you have this new ability and you have to use Dixie's twirling hair to get from places and jump. just as a kid and even as an adult, like changing the physics up just that little bit, where like moon physics just blew my mind, and to this day remains like the most memorable Donkey Kong Country level in my mind.
You know, I think 3 is probably the one I've played the least out of the entire series, so I don't even remember that.
See, you gotta get in there. Yeah, and they instead of the mine carts, they have like sled levels where you're like in a toboggan going down a mountain. It's really cool. There's
Oh,
some cool
wow.
ideas. Yeah.
I will need to dive back. I've been actually contemplating doing a full replay now that all the games are going to be on Switch.
Mm.
Doing a full replay of, you know, DKC 1 through 3 and then Returns and Tropical Freeze. I could probably skip the Game Boy ones, even though I know they're also quite good.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know. It's hard to go back to Game Boy games a lot of the times in 2025.
It really is.
But yeah, that's a solid list and has a decent amount of overlap with mine, which, you know, you'd imagine since there's a finite number of gimmicks here. But my number 5 is going to be the rocket barrels. I'm right there with you. I think that they are fun. I think they're a good kind of change of pace in the modern Donkey Kong Country games. And yes, they can be like, I want to throw my controller through the wall inducing, but overall, fun time, cool gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, this is going to be maybe controversial as well, because it is a very frustrating gimmick, but I think there's a cool idea behind it. And it is the stop and go. If you remember that from the original Donkey Kong Country, I think it comes back for subsequent entries where
those little clump enemies.
Yeah, they look like they're made out of clay, and like they run back and forth real fast, and you got to hit the barrels that turn I guess it's either red light or green light.
Yeah.
I forget. It was always reversed in my mind. Like, oh, that should be red instead of green when they're stopped. But yeah, so stop and go. It was always like super, like my hands would get really, really sweaty when I'm playing those levels, because like they paced it out so perfectly where it was like, if you don't like make this run exactly the right way and make the jumps time just perfectly, you are not going to hit that barrel in time, and you're going to be dodging one of these like really creepy guys that make these really loud stomping sounds as they run back and forth. And they only get faster the deeper you get into the game. So it's a tense, very difficult, frustrating gimmick, but one that it's stuck with me through the years. Number 3 for me is going to be the silhouette levels. For all the reasons that we've sung the praises of in the course of this episode. I think that, it's absolutely gorgeous, and it's one of those gimmicks that I think I probably enjoy the most, actually, if we're talking just like pure aesthetic and pure like, hey, this feels really good to play in this gimmick. I think that the silhouette levels is up there for me. Number 2, maybe, oh no, that's not the most iconic gimmick, because my number 1 is the most iconic gimmick, but the mine carts is my number 2.
Okay.
And it's just like, I remember the first time I played the minecart level in Donkey Kong Country 1, and my dad and I would play it, and we were just like losing our minds in frustration.
Hard. It's so hard.
Because especially when they like there's the one level in Donkey Kong Country 1 where it's like, you think you've cleared it, and then there's the one guy at the end that just like they send is just like kind of like a screw you, like you thought you were done, but nope,
man.
And then there's some of them where it's like the physics just don't seem to physic right, where it's like you're like going down and then you go up, and it's like it kind of stops your momentum so much that you have to time the jump just right, or because there's also the cart right on the edge of the track that you're supposed to land on, and that always made it so it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna lose one of my characters in that moment. But yeah,
that sense of relief though when you get to the end.
Oh yeah,
it's like, oh god, I can breathe again.
It almost reminds, like, there are certain challenges in video games where, like, I like Final Fantasy X celestial weapons. Like when there's some of those challenges, like whether you're dodging the lightning bolts or the chocobo races in those games, and it's like you complete it and you're like, I hated every second of that. But like, oh, I got the reward, and in the reward of Donkey Kong Country, it's like I get to the next level. But it's like, oh, thank God I don't have to do that again unless I like decide to replay this game. And like that's how those minecart levels feel. But at the same time, it is like all at once exhilarating as well.
Yeah. Well, and there's also that moment where you get to the end and you realize that you got like the K, the O, and the G, and you like missed it. You're like, no, I have to do this again, don't I?
So my number one, it is maybe controversial to even call this a gimmick rather than a core gameplay mechanic,
Hmm.
but it's just the barrel blasting. Like when
Oh
you get into
yeah.
like a long series of blasting through barrels and like timing based, and like then you hit it just right, and it
Hmm.
sometimes will even unlock like a secret area, like it'll shoot you up to another part of the level you didn't know existed. That is so satisfying. And I remember like when you really get into like kind of tunnel vision with like when the barrels are going back and forth and you time it just right to go between like two
Right.
bees. And it's like, man, that felt so good. Like that was always like one of the most rewarding feelings when I was playing video games as a kid.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that they've kept that core mechanic or gimmick, whatever you want to classify it as, in the series, because it really is like, barrels, just because of Donkey Kong's tendency to throw barrels down at
Hmm.
Mario in the original Donkey Kong. It's just become such core to his identity, and it's like they
Yeah.
just needed a circular thing to throw at Mario, and not like there's
Yeah.
no real rhyme or reason why he's throwing barrels aside from it was probably easier to animate and represent what it was on a 1982 arcade machine. 81, I
One.
almost
Yeah.
said 81.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
so
love I love when they're just out of view. Like you think you fall into your death, or like you jump up out of out of view at the top when you're on top of a tree, and you like hear that noise of getting into a barrel, and then it's like launching you to like the other side of the screen,
yes.
or like into some bonus level that you had no idea, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I never would have like even looked there. So yeah.
Yeah. So I absolutely love all of those gimmicks from Donkey Kong Country. By the way, we didn't talk about this since we're on a Donkey Kong Country episode largely.
Hmm.
Uh, are you excited for the Super Nintendo World Donkey Kong Country expansion?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pumped. I've been to Japan 3 times, and so if I go back again, I might go visit. That, and then has it been announced for here in the United States as well?
Florida. Yeah, the
Okay,
Florida
right.
one is getting it. I think
Okay.
that opens in May.
All right. Well, my little brother lives in Florida, so I'll go down and check out Donkey Kong Land. Hopefully, I've never been to Universal Studios like ever of like any kind, so it would be like a whole new experience for me. I think it's really cool. I think it's going to get more people like interested in the series, and that's always good.
Yeah, my former coworker Alex Van Aken and we went out to Osaka back in 2021 for
Hmm.
or no, it was 2022 for the Street Fighter 6 cover story for Game Informer, and I looked over at him like, probably a few days before we went, and I was like, dude, we should go to Universal Studios Japan and go to Super Nintendo World, because this was before any of the US locations had opened. So I was like, we've got to do that. So we actually had an extra day where we were like, we're just going to take this entire day and go hang out in Super Nintendo World,
That's
and
amazing.
literally spent the entire day. Like you have to sign up for like to book an appointment
Wow.
to get into it. And so like we didn't know that. We just bought a ticket to Universal Studios and we got there and it was like you have to like use their app to like schedule a time. And I'm like, oh no, what if we can't get in there? We just came all the way out here, because it's like a decent drive outside of the city.
Yeah.
And thankfully we were able to get in at like 1 p.m. and then we spent literally like 7 hours in Super Nintendo World
Wow.
because it was so cool. I will say that the California one is not nearly as good as the Osaka one,
Mm,
but I think that the one in Florida is supposed to be on par with the Osaka one.
nice.
California just doesn't have the real estate to expand in the size that they need to make it the same level as what you see in Osaka, because it's such like a scrunched lot. They don't have the Yoshi ride. It's not multi-leveled the way the Osaka
Mm.
one is, and the food doesn't seem like it's as good. I wasn't able to get into the Toadstool Cafe in the California one, because like it was like, oh, you need to sign up scanning this QR code, and I scanned it as soon as I got there, and it's like, we're already sold out and booked for the day. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm not eating because there's no other food in here, and you have to leave and like leave your appointment in order to like go somewhere else. And I'm like,
That
well, I'm glad
stinks.
I came here hungry so I could eat at Toadstool Cafe, and then there was no food available.
That's
But
rough.
yeah, go to the Florida one because Donkey Kong Country will be there. And if you happen to go out to Japan again, it's obviously at the Osaka one open
Yeah.
now. But yeah, I just figured I would ask you, since you are also a Donkey Kong Country fan as I am. So
Yeah. I
Ben,
will
that
have to
brings us to
look into it.
oh, And that brings us to the final segment of the episode. It's the eShop Gem of the Week. It is a chance for you to give some shine to a game that might not otherwise get it on this podcast. So what is your eShop Gem of the Week?
All right, so my eShop Gem of the Week is Lil Gator Game, not Little Gator Game, Lil Gator Game, which is like, I mean, you want to talk about a great 3D platformer, you know, it's obviously inspired by Zelda. It's got those Wind Waker visuals with the shells. I can never say that right. Cell shaded. Yeah, it's like a tongue twister. Visuals but it's just like a game that is full of joy. There's no hit, like you can't die, you can't even get hurt. You can throw yourself off the biggest mountain. There's enemies,
even a ragdoll button.
Yeah. All the enemies are made of cardboard. They just stand. It's just cardboard. You just cut them. They turn into confetti. You can use the confetti to buy like fun outfits, and it's such a fun game. It's so low stakes, but it has like a nice like heartfelt message to it about like a little brother and his older sister who is a video game designer. I just love it so much.
Like he's like longing to like the times that they used to play together, and she's too busy with like, I forget if it's school or work or something like that, but like, I think she's like going to college to like become a video game designer, and she's like too busy with homework, and your entire plot of the game is to like
get her to play with you,
create a grand enough display of like imagination that like you can convince her to play with you. And like you do that by going around and like recruiting your friends to play with you at the playground or something like that.
And
like
to set up all these like, you know, grand looking. There's like a castle you're building at the playground, and enemies you're setting up, and there's like a ninja clan that has like throwing stars, and there's all these references to, you know, like Naruto and other. You get I think it's a grilled cheese, and it's like the Triforce.
Oh yeah,
it's amazing. It
is very cute. It's extremely wholesome. I reviewed it. I think it was my first review of 2024. No, 2023. It was my first review of 2023 because it came out at the end of 2022. And I was completely enamored by it. Obviously, it's not going to have like the depth of something like a Legend of Zelda, but it is just an outright wholesome family game. But it's one of those games that anybody can enjoy. It's not like, oh, this is a kid game for sure. It's absolutely enjoyable by kids, or able to be enjoyed by kids. But it's also, it was fun for me as a then 36-year-old man. So it's $20 normally, but it's actually on sale until January 27th for $12. So if you're listening to this anywhere around the time of this episode coming out, go check it out. It's a very fun game. And Ben, we actually didn't do a news segment this week, a full news segment, but one piece of news that was related to this game, which, by the way, you were planning on highlighting this game before this announcement came out. We were discussing this the night before this announcement hit. And then we wake up and there's a trailer for DLC. This game came out more than 2 years ago, never got any DLC. And then the day that we are planning on talking about it, the developer and publisher announced a new expansion for it. So the expansion is called In the Dark, which the studio says will double the size of the game. And it'll give you new characters, new toys, a completely new area, which is the caves of the original island. And we unfortunately don't have a release date for it, but Platonic Friends, which we talked about Platonic earlier, Platonic Friends, which is their publishing label, is the publisher of this game. They say that we're going to learn more later this year. Yeah, and it feels like they're going that Tears of the Kingdom route, because, you know, it's like, oh, this game's very much like Zelda. And how they added that whole entire underground world, and that okay, we'll send him into the caves. I don't know how they're gonna put Little Gator up in the clouds, you know, in the next DLC. They're gonna do it. They're gonna find a way, put him on a skyscraper or something. But I was pumped. I couldn't believe it. It was like such a weird coincidence that we had, you know, planned to talk about this game, and then it's just like, hey, more Little Gator Game. And my one of my good friends, Narelle, she got me the physical copy of Little Gator Game. That was I forget, it was like, I don't want to say the wrong company. One of those companies that makes like limited editions of physical copies of Super Rare. That was it. Yeah. And it came with like a bunch of like fun little trading cards and things like that that I have not opened because like I already had the game digitally, and I was like, I'm just going to keep this in mint condition
and look at it. It's on my shelf over here with all my like most prized possessions. But yeah, Little Gator Game. It's fantastic little adventure. It doesn't take that long. Like you can 100% it in not too much time,
Probably
beyond
less than 10 hours.
Yeah, beyond
like
the original game, you could 100% it. But it feels good. It's just so much fun. The different like items you equip, like there is one that lets you ragdoll, just like there's like a sticky hand that you can throw and like grapple up to things. You have your sweater or whatever that you're using, like a glider all over the place. You build stamina by getting like climbing bracelets, and you go higher and higher, and then just jump off of things and fly all over. It's just like a wonderful game of like exploration, and the visual style, like the design of the actual animal characters, is very indicative of A Short Hike, which is another one of my favorite eShop games ever. Like they kind of have that same like animal look and build. A little bit of Night in the Woods too. Another great game. But yeah, I could go on and on about my favorite little animal games.
Yeah, Little Gator Game is a terrific experience. Short Hike as well. Night in the Woods. All those are fantastic picks. But the game that we're talking about was Little Gator Game. If you want to check that out, it is available on the eShop. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to get the In the Dark DLC, presumably at some point this year. If we don't get it this year, it's going to be at least revealed further later this year by Mega Wobble and Platonic Friends. So look forward to that. But Ben, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of All Things Nintendo.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I've been a fan for a while now, and I felt awkward. I didn't want to be like, hey, notice me, put me on your podcast. But now that I'm here, I assume, I'll be back every week for
every single week,
special segments, rewatching Mario movies and telling you to play Donkey Kong Country 3, like
that kind of thing. But yeah, you will definitely be back. And I appreciate the kind words. And thank you so much to everyone for listening. As you know, the Patreon and the associated Discord server are the best ways to get any questions or comments in, but you can also get in touch with me, Brian at allthingsnintendo.com, or hit me up on social media at Brian P. Shea. That is also my YouTube channel name, and if you would subscribe to that channel, it would help me out a lot. Then let everyone know where they can find you online.
All right, so on Twitter, you can find me at SuperBentendo. On Instagram, it's Bentendo64 because I just couldn't pick a handle. And then if you want to find me on Blue Sky, it's actually at radishgames.com because I make board games on the side with my wife, and that's the name of our little company. So,
yeah, we'll put a link to Radish Games on the show notes, but that is our show for this week. Thank you again for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time. Before we wrap up this episode of the All Things Nintendo podcast, I just want to give a special shout out to the $10 patrons of the show. Abdullah, Adam Scott, Elena R., Alec Acanino, Alex Stadnick, Andy Junkins, Ben Richland, Chaps My Ass, Colton Bredlau, Dan Norman, Derek Sigmund, Dusty Beeman, Ian T. Clark, Jackal, Jawar Hello, Jill Grote, Johnny Five, Jordan Sloat, Jose Villalobos, Joseph, Joshua DeProy, Justin Childress, Cody Gibson, Creeper207, Mad Genie Confused Koala, Megan S., Nintendo 101, Paul at Drunk on Mako, Philip G. Cox, Pratable, Robert Sousa, Russell Sayer, Scott Matthews, Smithy Poo, Tux DC, Wham Bam Sam the Gaming Man, Zach Marcus, and Zachary Pliggy. Thank you so much for your continued support of the show.